Hi, so this video is to talk about the idea of death as a state. So when we talk about definitions of death, whether they're traditional biomedical definitions of death or whether they're brain death, there's this idea that someone is either alive or dead, and what you're really looking for is to find that defining moment. Definitions of death are ultimately rooted in the idea that you have to know the exact moment someone died, where you can say, okay, I've gone through this checklist, they're dead. So thinking of death as a state is a different way of approaching the question of what is death. Because instead of saying that it's something that can be tracked and identified and you can go through your checklist and say, check, 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 they're dead, it's thinking about death as a state of being. Okay, so let me give you an example. There are 5 different ways that people think about death states. Let's get the whole hand here. One is that death is kind of like life, but it's enfeebled. One is that death is a continuation. One is death as a state of perpetual development. And one is death as cycling and recycling. And finally, death as a state of nothingness. A good way to think about the idea of the death state is that it's what happens after that trackable moment of death. So once someone dies, what then is going on? If the moment is the act of dying, what happens after? So, what happens after death? Just small questions to start this class off with. But so how do people understand that existence or not existence after that trackable moment where you filled your checklist and you said, okay, brain death. This is what happens after. 5 different options that are the most culturally prevalent. The first argues that death is kind of like life, but a little bit different. A really good example of this is the Day of the Dead. And the idea behind this is that there's some images on the text of this lesson, but people decorate gravestones and build altars with the idea that the spirits of the dead come back to their home and their family, and they get to be around the family and enjoy the things they like. Now, people who are alive, like you and me, we eat, let's say, 3 meals a day. In the idea behind the Day of the Dead, you get 1 meal once a year. And so you're kind of like life in the sense that these spirits still enjoy the things they used to enjoy and they eat the things they used to eat and they enjoy being with their family. But it's a little bit different because they're not doing it all the time. They're doing it once a year on this holiday. So this is what I mean when I say one way of understanding the state of death, so what happens after that trackable moment of dying, is something that is enfeebled. Similar to life, but not quite. People who are alive eat 3 meals a day. Spirits who are dead eat once a year. So that's one way of thinking about it. The second way is to think about death as a continuation of sorts. So not exactly the same, but close. A really good example of this, and there should be some example images on the text for this lesson, is the idea of the ancient Egyptians. So hopefully at some point in your life you've seen pictures of ancient Egyptian tombs. If not, there's going to be a link on the lesson and some optional reading. But the thing about the ancient Egyptians is that they put a lot of stuff in the tombs, with the idea as part of their religious system that the people who had died, once that trackable moment of dying has occurred, once they're no longer using their mortal body, their essence, their spirit, their soul, would need stuff in the afterlife. So it's a continuation in some ways. If you need a boat in your current life, you're going to need a boat in the afterlife. Make sure my hands are in frame when I motion. A really good example to demonstrate what this means is that they would bury women with cosmetics. And most women don't want, some women enjoy cosmetics, some people don't. But the idea of having to do makeup and do your hair in the afterlife doesn't strike everyone as, a really great option. The idea of having a bad hair day once you're dead just seems kind of cruel. But in the ancient Egyptian worldview, the state of death, that idea of what happens after the trackable moment of dying, was so similar to when people were alive that you would need everything that you needed, down to your cosmetics, your perfume, your soap. All of it you need, because death, according to the ancient Egyptians, is a continuation. So this is our second interpretation of the death state. First is that death is like life, but a little bit different or enfeebled, to use the terminology of Casaubon. And the second here is that death is a continuation in some way. The third is the idea that after your trackable moment of dying, death, what happens after, that state of being that exists after dying, is a state of perpetual development. And this approach to the death state is what you're going to hear in a lot of religious worldviews. So a lot of religious philosophies argue that when you die, you go to something either better, where you then live a happy life and you're good, something where you suffer, or some kind of middle waiting place. So both of those, all three of those options, a good place, a bad place, a medium place, are things that are designed to help you grow or develop. It's something that is different from your current life, and it shows an improvement, hopefully. It shows something where you grow. So if you're thinking Judeo-Christian or Abrahamic faith traditions, these are really strong examples of this idea of you die, that act of dying that represents a split between life and death. Then after that act of dying, this death portion is something where you're growing or developing or changing. So under this third approach of death as a state, death is a state of perpetual development. The fourth, we also see this in many religious traditions, is the idea of death as a cycling and recycling. So the idea of rebirth in Hinduism falls under this category. You die, that act of dying occurs, and then your essence continues on in another bodily form in a different category. We also see this in some non-theistic or non-religious approaches, especially ones that are very scientifically based, that see, for example, humans as just kind of collections of atoms. So then you are an arrangement of atoms, and when you die, those atoms go back into the universe into something else, maybe a tree, a cloud, a frog. They are rearranged into another form because you're just a collection of pieces, atoms. So that's cycling and recycling. So far we have the idea of death as a state. It's kind of like life, but enfeebled, a continuation, perpetual development, cycling and recycling. That leads us to a state of nothingness. This is not a real popular idea because it's a very, very scary idea. And this is the idea that after that act of dying occurs, nothing happens. You're just gone. Any essence that you had is forever dissipated, never to be reformed in any way, never to be reshaped, and never to have any kind of existence, either in like a heaven or a hell or a spirit where you can come see your family or where you have an afterlife. None of that. It's all gone. Now, I say that this is not a real popular view. It's because not a lot of cultures really propagate this. It's not something you see a lot. And you don't see it a lot because it's very unsettling for people. Let's talk about why that could be unsettling. So after this video, there's going to be some discussion questions. I want you to go ahead and answer those in your notes and use those as studying tools. So why do you think the idea of a nothingness as a death state is so controversial? Why do you think people find it so unsettling?